Welcome to the debate. Imagine handing a partner $10 billion to help build the future of technology, only to find out from a public press release, no less, that they just fired the CEO you trusted.
Oh, yeah. That kind of shock would force literally anyone to rethink a relationship.
Exactly. And today, we're looking at the fallout of exactly that scenario. We're talking about two of the most powerful companies in the world, Microsoft and OpenAI.
It really is probably the most fascinating corporate dynamic of the decade. I mean, we are watching a partnership that practically defined the modern artificial intelligence boom completely reshape itself in real time.
Right. And just a few years ago, the arrangement was, incredibly straightforward. Microsoft provided billions in funding and the massive processing power. By that, I mean the cloud infrastructure, basically the giant network of computers needed to build and run AI.
Yeah, the physical machines. And in exchange, Microsoft got exclusive rights to bake OpenAI's cutting-edge AI into products like Bing and Copilot. It was a very unified front.
It was. But here in 2026, that front looks very different. Microsoft is actively building its own internal AI teams. And meanwhile, OpenAI is getting massive amounts of money and computer power from Microsoft's direct competitors, like Amazon and Oracle.
Which, forces us to really look at the motivation behind these moves.
Exactly. So the central question for us today is this. Are we watching the natural, healthy growth of two companies who simply need more space and resources to expand? Or is this a defensive breakdown of trust, where both sides are pulling apart because they feel vulnerable?
Well, I argue this is a slow, deliberate unraveling. It's driven by lost trust and the fear of relying too much on a single partner.
And I believe this decoupling is just a natural, necessary evolution for two growing tech giants expanding their businesses.
I know where you stand on this, but if we look closely at the timeline, the actions these companies are taking, they don't look like standard expansion. They look like risk mitigation. It's like two partners quietly building lifeboats.
I see why you think that, but I think we have to start by framing this situation not as a divorce, but as a startup that has finally grown up.
Okay, how so?
Well, in the beginning, a single partner was enough. Microsoft's initial $1 billion in 2019, and then that massive $10 million investment in early 2023, they were absolutely perfect for OpenAI's early days. It gave them the fuel they needed.
Sure, for a small research lab.
Right. But look at OpenAI today. After their funding round in February 2026, we are talking about a massive company. They're valued at $730 billion.
It's a staggering valuation. I completely agree.
It is. And, with that scale comes a massive logistical problem. OpenAI's models require an absolute ocean of processing power to train and operate. It's like they've outgrown a small workspace and now they need a whole skyscraper.
Mm-hmm.
So, removing Microsoft's exclusive hosting rights in late 2025, which basically meant Microsoft was no longer the only company allowed to provide cloud servers to OpenAI, it was a necessary step for their sheer survival. Microsoft literally couldn't build data centers fast enough to keep up.
That's a very clean, logical argument, but have you considered the timeline of how this actually unfolded?
I mean, I think the timeline supports the growth narrative.
See, I disagree. Because if this were purely about outgrowing the physical supply of servers, the renegotiation would have been simple. But if you look at the sequence of events, you see a relationship based on companies protecting themselves from a sudden threat.
You're talking about the board incident.
Right. The real shift didn't begin with a server shortage. It began in November 2023, with the OpenAI board abruptly firing Sam Altman. Imagine being Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella.
Ooh, the famous weekend coup. Yeah.
Exactly. You've committed over $10 billion to this company. You've built your entire product strategy around their models. And a tiny nonprofit board fires the leader you backed without even giving you a phone call first?
Well, Microsoft obviously moved quickly to help bring him back.
They did. But that weekend proved a terrifying reality to Microsoft. They had absolutely no structural control over their most important asset.
I mean, they did secure a non-voting observer seat on the board immediately after the dust settled. They made sure they were in the room going forward.
But an observer seat is just that, right? You observe. You have no formal power to stop a decision. It's a concession that looks reassuring in a press release, but in corporate governance, it's completely hollow.
So you think that changed everything?
I argue that the trauma of that weekend fundamentally changed Microsoft's risk profile. From that moment on, every single action they've taken has been a defensive move to ensure they are never caught off guard like that again.
Look, I totally understand the psychological impact of that weekend. It was incredibly chaotic. But we really need to look at the actual business deals that followed because they point to success, not panic.
Success? By finding new partners?
Yes, exactly. Let's look at the compute infrastructure, the physical hardware that actually runs these AI models. In June 2024, OpenAI signed a $300 million deal with Oracle to use their servers. And more recently, they secured that massive $110 billion funding round involving Amazon, NVIDIA, and SoftBank.
Right, the 2026 round.
Yeah. I look at those deals and I don't see a company running away from Microsoft. I see a company that is simply absorbing every available resource in the market because consumer demand is through the roof. It's pure supply and demand. They just need more machines than one vendor can physically provide.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it was only about supply. Let me tell you why. If this were a simple capacity issue, OpenAI would have just said, hey, Microsoft, keep building as fast as you can, and we'll just supplement the overflow with Oracle.
Which is essentially what they're doing?
No, but that isn't what happened in the boardroom. OpenAI actively negotiated to restrict Microsoft's financial upside. They proposed capping Microsoft's future profits at 33%.
You're talking about the equity caps during the restructure.
Yes. They explicitly fought to eliminate the clause that made Microsoft their exclusive cloud host. They didn't just want supplemental computers, they wanted to fundamentally dilute Microsoft's leverage over them.
I don't know if dilute is the right word.
You don't aggressively cap your partner's profits if you're just looking for a little extra server space. You do it to regain your independence.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently, because we have to look at how that negotiation actually concluded. It didn't end in a lawsuit.
No, it didn't.
It ended with a formal agreement in October 2025. Microsoft walked away with a 27% stake in OpenAI, which was valued around $135 billion at the time. In exchange, Microsoft agreed to drop its exclusive hosting rights.
Right, a compromise.
Exactly. Both sides got what they needed. OpenAI got the freedom to scale, and Microsoft locked in a massive financial return. That isn't a war. That is a highly sophisticated, mature business negotiation.
Well, it was a truce, and a truce always implies there was a conflict that needed settling. But okay, let's look past the hardware and talk about the software side, because that's where Microsoft's reaction becomes incredibly revealing.
You mean their internal AI teams?
Right. If OpenAI is finding new computer providers, Microsoft's response on the software side tells a story of intense vulnerability. Look at the investments they've made since the Altman firing. In March 2024, Microsoft spent $650 million to essentially acquire the talent from Inflection AI.
And brought in Mustafa Suleyman.
Exactly. They brought him in to lead a newly formed Microsoft AI division. They are pouring hundreds of millions into building an internal team to create AI models that directly compete with OpenAI's models.
I really wouldn't use words like vulnerability or panic, though. They are executing a clear diversification plan.
But think about the analogy. It's like building your own car because you no longer trust your taxi driver. If you already have the best AI in the world integrated into your products, why spend a fortune to build a replica in-house?
Because the company the size of Microsoft simply cannot put all of its future growth into a single basket.
Which proves my point. They realized relying on OpenAI was too dangerous.
But realizing a single point of failure is risky doesn't mean the partnership is broken. It's just smart corporate governance. If you look at any major tech company, Apple, Google, Amazon, they all dual source their most critical components.
Sure, for hardware parts, not usually for their core software engine.
But having an in-house AI team alongside your premier partner is a standard safety net heavy consumer products like Bing, while developing their own smaller, highly efficient models for specific enterprise clients. It's a segmentation of the market, not a betrayal.
I hear you, but I think it violates the foundational spirit of their original deal. The logic back in 2019 was very clear. OpenAI pushes the boundaries of AI research, and Microsoft handles the commercialization and the hardware.
Yeah, but things change over 7 years.
They do, but by building out their own consumer AI models, Microsoft signaled they were hedging their bets. And OpenAI clearly read that signal. It's a cycle of retaliation. Microsoft starts building its own AI, so OpenAI secures hardware from Amazon. They are actively unraveling the dependencies that tied them together.
I'm just not convinced by that, because it assumes they are communicating through passive-aggressive retaliation. Satya Nadella and Sam Altman are highly rational actors navigating a market that is expanding faster than the early internet.
It is expanding, yes.
Right, so the pie is growing so fast that it's simply too large for a strict, exclusive one-to-one relationship to make sense anymore.
Well, if they are so confident in this expanding pie, then we need to look at what they are actually saying to their investors behind closed doors. Because the public market sees these massive funding rounds, but the internal documents reveal a profound lack of trust.
I assume you're referring to the vulnerability warning that leaked.
Yes, the CNBC report. The document OpenAI circulated to prospective investors. In this document, OpenAI explicitly highlighting their reliance on Microsoft's funding and compute power as a major systemic risk.
Which is an entirely factual, legally required statement.
Wait, let me finish the point. They wrote that any modification or termination of their partnership with Microsoft could severely harm OpenAI's business. They actually told the people giving them billions of dollars that their most important partner is also their greatest vulnerability.
Right, but again, that is standard legal practice. An OpenAI spokesperson responded directly to that report, and they correctly called it a standard legal risk factor disclosure.
Of course they called it standard. They had to downplay it after it leaked to the press.
But it is standard. Anyone who understands corporate finance knows this. When a company takes money from institutional investors, the law requires them to document every conceivable risk. It's to protect themselves from shareholder lawsuits later.
I understand compliance, but
Think of it like this. If a car manufacturer gets 80% of its steel from one single supplier, they are legally required to tell investors, hey, if this steel supplier goes bankrupt, our business will suffer. Explaining a heavy reliance on your largest partner isn't a secret cry for help. It's just a legal checklist.
okay, I agree that risk disclosures are standard practice, but the risk they outlined is no longer just theoretical. We aren't just talking about a lawyer checking a box. We are watching the physical reality of that warning play out right now. And the proof is in the February 2026 funding round.
The $110 billion round.
Right. Look at the key players, Amazon, NVIDIA, SoftBank. The most crucial structural shift coming out of that event is that Amazon's computing commitments to OpenAI now actually exceed Microsoft's.
Well, Amazon runs AWS. They are the largest cloud provider on Earth. It makes perfect sense that they would absorb a massive share of the compute load.
But do you see the magnitude of that shift? Microsoft was the foundation. Microsoft's Azure cloud was the entire reason OpenAI survived its early years. And now, Amazon is providing more computing power to OpenAI than Microsoft is.
I just don't think using Amazon means replacing Microsoft.
The shift away from Microsoft isn't just a legal warning written on a piece of paper anymore. It is a physical reality. OpenAI has successfully replaced Microsoft as their primary engine. They've built the lifeboat, and they are actively sailing it.
Look, you were treating the cloud market like a zero-sum game. You're assuming that if Amazon wins a contract, Microsoft inherently loses. We have to remember the financial reality here. Microsoft still owns a 27% equity stake in OpenAI.
True. Their financial stake remains.
And it's an incredibly valuable stake. If OpenAI uses Amazon servers to build an even more powerful model and their valuation skyrockets, Microsoft still makes billions of dollars.
Financially, yes, it's a massive victory on paper.
They don't have to provide every single server to win. They put in roughly $13 billion, and that turned into a massive stake in a $730 billion company. They've already won financially.
But structurally and strategically, it's a very different story. Microsoft didn't invest $13 billion just to act like a passive hedge fund. They invested because they wanted OpenAI's models to be forever tethered to their Azure cloud ecosystem.
I'm not entirely sure Microsoft ever believed they could trap a company like OpenAI forever. Technology evolves too fast.
But instead of that tether, they watched OpenAI grow so powerful that OpenAI could rewrite the terms of their deal, drop the exclusivity, and hand the biggest computing contracts to Amazon. Microsoft lost the monopoly they tried to buy.
Microsoft's primary goal was to integrate cutting-edge AI into their core products to defend their existing business. They successfully integrated OpenAI into Copilot, which revolutionized their Office software. They revitalized Bing, they achieved their strategic goals. The purpose of a corporate alliance isn't to remain perfectly static forever.
I still think we have to trace this all back to the human element, specifically that weekend in November 2023.
You really think that one weekend defines all of this?
Yes, I do. You cannot understate the psychological impact of seeing a vital partner suddenly implode without warning. Every single thing that has happened since Microsoft spending hundreds of millions on internal AI teams, OpenAI securing cloud contracts with Amazon, all of it stems from the trauma of that weekend. They realized they were chained together, and they've spent the last 3 years systematically cutting those chains.
I fully agree that the board incident was a massive shock to the system. All human beings, including expert CEOs, are fallible. But the response from both companies was highly rational, not purely emotional.
Rational, but completely separate.
Microsoft stabilized the leadership, and then both companies simply diversified their operations to match the size of the market. The evidence shows two highly successful companies signing massive deals that allow them to expand globally.
But the exclusivity is absolutely gone. In the tech industry, they are now what we call frenemies. They are partners on paper, bound by legacy deals, but they are competitors in the real world. Microsoft's new internal AI team is actively pitching models to the exact same enterprise customers that OpenAI is trying to win.
Which, honestly, actually brings us to a fascinating point of convergence in this discussion.
How so?
Well, regardless of whether we view this shift as a healthy, mature evolution or a fearful, defensive unraveling, we both completely agree on the current reality. The era of the exclusive Microsoft and OpenAI alliance is officially over.
Oh, absolutely. That door is permanently closed. The relationship will never look the way it did in 2023.
Right? The market architecture is now infinitely more complex. It's no longer a simple two-player game where Microsoft provides the computers and OpenAI provides the brains. We now have Amazon, Oracle, NVIDIA, and SoftBank all deeply intertwined in the daily operations of OpenAI.
It's a tangled web. Everyone is relying on everyone else for different layers of the technology stack, while simultaneously trying to build their own independent systems so they don't get left behind. It's collaboration driven by necessity, not loyalty.
Exactly. And as we close our discussion today, I still maintain my position. Moving away from an exclusive partnership is a natural, mature evolution. It allows both Microsoft and OpenAI to grow independently and safely in a market that is simply too massive for any single alliance to dominate.
And I maintain that while they are both undeniably growing, the foundation of their specific relationship is cracked. The awkwardness and the broken trust from 2023 turned a mutually beneficial partnership into a defensive race for self-survival. They aren't expanding together hand in hand. They are actively building walls against each other.
It is a brilliant tension to observe, and it really has profound implications for the whole industry. For everyone listening, I encourage you to think about how these massive business partnerships evolve. When companies grow from small startups into industry giants with immense global responsibilities, the architecture of their agreements has to change.
It really does.
As artificial intelligence continues to scale and integrate into every part of our lives, there is so much more to explore in how these giant organizations share power, resources, and trust. Because ultimately, the way these companies manage their dependencies will dictate who controls the infrastructure of the future. Thank you for joining us on the debate.